Hello. So, for the audience that doesn't know you, feel free to introduce yourself.
Hey, my name's Jonathan Nelson. I am a CEO of HF Capital, and right now, our business is we are project managing IPOs and helping companies raise money through stock exchanges like the London, Toronto, and Australian Stock Exchange. Um, I grew up in Latin America. My first career was I was an ER and trauma nurse. I then transitioned into software engineering, moved to Silicon Valley, um, did a bunch of things, started a meetup group, it went viral. Um, that ended up meeting me into advising and helping startups raise money. And I've been doing that for about the last 10 to 15 years. So that's me. Hi.
So, okay, because, again, like I was saying before this, you were the founder of two different companies as well. One of them
Yes.
was Newsly, and the other one was Cute with
Yep.
3us.com.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
what are the stories behind those?
So I was a nurse. I was very frustrated because I was selling hours of my life to a hospital. And I knew that I wanted to figure out how to sell something different so I could make $4.5 million so I could retire early. When I heard that software engineers sell software, and if I sell an app for $1 and I sell 4.5 million of those apps, oh my gosh, I get to $4 million. This is genius. Why didn't anybody tell me? I know how to copy and paste 4 million times. And I'd been coding when I was a kid. And I went back to school for software engineering. So I moved to Silicon Valley and still working as a nurse and working on my startups. My first startup was cute.com with 3us because it was going to be like a Reddit clone, but just for sharing cat pictures. Why cat pictures? Because as a nurse, half of the email in my inbox were cat pictures, baby pictures, and puppy pictures. And in 2006, 2007, I had the brilliant insight, so far ahead of my time, that the internet is to share cat pictures. Launched that. Nobody cared. How do you get your first users on a social media site? It's really hard. Started building a system to create fake users so we could start actively sharing startups, start sharing cat pictures with people. And I got really sick of cat pictures all the time. So I stopped and I said, okay, cat pictures are addictive. What else on the internet is addictive? What are people addicted to? News, business news, financial news. How would you make money? Did some research. A quarter of all online advertising is on financial and business topics. So I said, I'm going to build a Reddit clone for business news. Launched that. Started collecting that. Did that for about a year or so. And then I had done some stuff. Again, I had a bunch of fake users on my website because I just took a lot of the software that I built the first time, changed it, relaunched it for the second thing. And a handful of pages were getting a ton of traffic for Google. And I was like, why is this? And it was because of the search engine optimization. I had inadvertently done some really good SEO on some of these pages, and Google liked it. And my traffic started doubling every 8 weeks. And I'm like, holy crap, I should go out and raise some money. And I can tell you the story of why I shut that down, but that's the story of those two companies. At the strong, I was pitching this investor in Silicon Valley, Newsly, and I was talking to him about it. And I was also talking to him about this meetup group that I'd started, Hackers and Founders. And it was me and a handful of nerds at a pub talking about startups. And that was in the process of going viral. And so I pitched him the startup, and I also talked to him about all these entrepreneurs trying to figure out how to raise money. He's like, dude, send me some of those entrepreneurs. So I made 16 introductions to him from people that I'd met at the meetup. And at the end of it, he said, drop everything you're doing and start an accelerator. And I was like, oh, okay. I'm not successful. I don't know how to do this. I'm a nurse. I wipe butts for a living. I save lives. But we figured out how to build a startup accelerator. And I ended up shutting Newsly down because Startup Accelerator at the time I thought that would be a lot more profitable. I was wrong, but those are the story of Qt and Newsly. Entrepreneur success in Silicon Valley, generally the data that's thrown around is that 1 out of every 10 startups succeeds, and 9 out of every startup quote unquote fails. And so when I came to Silicon Valley, my attitude was, I have to fail at 9 startups, and then I'm going to become a millionaire. So I came with this crazy idea that I was going to build 10 companies over 10 years. And I could do it 3 nights a week or 4 nights a week because I only worked as a nurse 3 nights a week. So 2 startups down, an accelerator wasn't a bad start. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So, well, now that follows up. So, are you okay with talking numbers?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. So, did you ever reach that goal of $4.5 million?
On paper.
Okay. So, what does that mean?
So, the accelerator I started, our first class, we did it for free. We called it Hackers and Founders Co-op. So startups would chip in some of their stock into a small holding company. Now those are called special purpose vehicles, SPVs. And we would give the entrepreneurs part of the SPV, the whole SPV themselves. So it was a way for the entrepreneurs to share stock. And then we would keep half of the SPV, and they would contribute anywhere between 0.5% to 3% of their company to this SPV. And then they would get part of the SPV back. And then we would do, that's how we would do it. So we worked with 75 companies like that. On paper, at its peak, was $4.5 million. It's probably on paper worth about 2.5 right now. But the problem is how do you turn, a dude building a startup, so it gives you some of his stock. How do you turn that into cash? That's really hard. And so the last 6 years, I've been focused on trying to turn some of that stock into cash. And it turns out that is a global problem that I'm trying to fix now. Does that answer your question?
So, basically, what you're saying is, how do you convert something that's worth millions of dollars into straight cash?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, in terms of money that you've made, though, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, money that's like liquid assets. Like,
Yep.
Can you put a number on that?
I've been broke for years. I made more money as a nurse.
Huh. Interesting.
So, as a nurse in Silicon Valley, some of the highest nursing salaries in the world because they have very strong nursing unions. California has laws that force hospitals to only give nurses a certain number of patients. And it's really hella expensive to live in Silicon Valley. So $100,000, a family of 4 making less than $100,000 in Silicon Valley is considered poverty level, enough for state services. So I made $150K a year working nights and weekends as a nurse. On paper, I've made a lot more than that. Actual cash, I think probably my biggest year was about 100K. So how much do I have in the bank right now? Nothing. The last year and a half have been really rough.
Okay. So, but here's what I'm confused now. So
Yeah.
because if you have the companies and you've done, like some pretty good work, right?
Yeah.
Company wise, how, to me, like, I don't know how it doesn't translate, right?
How can you lose $4.5 million in paper money in stock?
Well, I'm saying if you have a company that's worth a lot of money, but then you're not
Yep.
worth a lot of money, is what I'm saying.
Yep. So Silicon Valley is really weird. So the actual data, and I've talked to guys who have made like 2,000 to 4,000 investments in technology startups. And 2.5%, anywhere between 2 and 3% of those companies become giant unicorns like Uber, Reddit, what have you. So you have a 2.5 to 3% quote unquote success rate. When companies get to that size, if I own stock in that company, it's really pretty easy to sell it to somebody else. But you generally have to know somebody else that you can sell it to, right? It's rich people buying and trading rich people stuff, which is imaginary paper stock in a company that imaginary at some point might list on the stock exchange. At that point, it's all, buy and sell. The goal of Silicon Valley, the dream of every investor here, is that you invest in companies, they grow big enough, and then one of them hits the stock market and you make 10,000 times your initial investment. So when I started, I've worked with 75 companies, and those companies, none of them have gotten to IPO, and a lot of them have shut down. I have one company that's still on paper is worth about $150 million. But the rest of those, that paper, that stock, that magic imaginary stock number, I've written that down to zero. Because I don't think that I'm ever going to be able to turn that into actual cash. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? But when these 75 companies, you take one company, 1% of a company that's worth $100 million, your 1% is worth $1 million. If I had 1% of 4 companies worth $100 million, I would have $4 million on paper. If those companies died and they had to fire everybody, that paper at one point, somebody had invested in that company and it was worth $100 million, but now the company is worth zero. That happens all the time in Silicon Valley. That happens 97 times out of 100, probably 90, 85 times out of 100. The company's just shut down. So my 75 companies, most of them have shut down in the last 10 years.
So what's the ultimate goal? Is it still just make $4.5 million, or?
No. So this meetup group, Hackers and Founders, it was really weird. It was just me and a handful of nerds in a bar. And it was never supposed to be a business. But all of a sudden, after the economic collapse in 2009, 2008, like hundreds of people from all over the world started coming to Silicon Valley trying to raise money for their startup. And they, I'm a bored software nerd. I know how to code. The economy sucks. I built something. Some people are using it. I'm making a little bit of money. Oh my gosh, I should raise money for this company. I got to go to Silicon Valley. So they'd buy a ticket to Silicon Valley for 2 weeks. And they're like, hey, I'm a hacker and I'm a founder. I should go to this meetup. And so we started having 200 to 300 people show up at this meetup every week, somewhere in Silicon Valley. And after my first 4,000 to 5,000 conversations with entrepreneurs, now those meetups went viral. Before COVID, those meetups had happened on and off in over 200 cities around the globe. Several 100,000 people had attended Hackers and Founders events. And so after 4,000 to 5,000 conversations with entrepreneurs about what a pain in the ass it is to raise money, I'm like, dude, there's a bug in this system. Like something's seriously broken. Like if I was a nurse, if doctors were right 3% of the time, and the 3% became like ultramarathon triathletes, and 97% of their patients died, I'd be hiring lawyers and calling the State Department of Health trying to save these people. Like a 3% success rate on investing is still really kind of stupid in my mind. That's the numbers, how Silicon Valley worked. It works. I mean, it works often enough. Silicon Valley generates 15,000 millionaires a year, at least. But I had a lot of friends in Mexico, in Argentina, in Eastern Europe, in the Middle East, Southeast Asia, Africa, who were building tech companies. It's really hard to convince an investor in Lagos, Nigeria, or in Guadalajara, Mexico, that if they buy my stock now, that I'm going to be able to take that company to IPO, and that company is going to be worth, $10 billion. People are just like, nah, BS. I don't buy that. It's not going to happen. So Silicon Valley gets about $100 billion a year of investment. And we generate in a good year 150 IPOs. And Latin America, which is 10%-ish of the world's economy, this year will get $1.5 billion in venture investment. Why? It's like, what stock exchange in Latin America would you want to IPO on? None. If I'm a Mexican tech company IPOing in the United States, I have to be 3 to 5 times better than any US tech companies for people to trust me as an entrepreneur, and that my stock is worthwhile and that they would actually want to buy my stock. So what's my goal now? If we can figure out a way to help these companies in Mexico, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Lagos, Nigeria, Southeast Asia, if we can help these people list their companies on a stock exchange, the local investors will say, oh, holy crap, I could make a lot of money doing this. And you would start getting a lot more investment flowing into Latin America, where I grew up. So if I'm right with what I'm doing now, if I am able to start taking a bunch of these companies to IPO in London, we will grow the economies of Latin America. We will help solve poverty in Latin America. Like I mentioned at the start that I grew up in Latin America. My mom and dad did missionary work. The first 4 years of my life, I was the only white kid in a tiny little village in rural Honduras called Minas de Oro. And I grew up playing soccer with kids who didn't have shoes. That still bugs me, dude. I'm 52. Like poverty, I hate poverty. Like being poor really sucks. And like, how do we solve poverty? Well, countries need to get richer. Honduras, dude, they sell bananas, coffee, and beef. And the ground isn't that good for growing coffee. But what if you could get a group of nerds, sell software to people around the world, and they give their employees stock? You could help create 100 millionaires in Honduras. That would completely change Honduras's economy. So, yeah, sure. I want my $4.5 million in cash. Really, what I want to do is I want to help solve poverty in poor countries like Latin America, Africa, parts of Southeast Asia, India. Like, I still want to help people. I worked as a nurse. I helped people. I walked into patients' rooms. I said, hi, what hurts? How can I help? I meet a CEO right now, and I generally ask them, like, what sucks about your business? What's helpful? And I generally try to help out as much as I can for free. If they're particularly right now, if they want to help sell their stock, if they want to help, list their stock on a stock exchange, raise money that way, then at that point, we'll come up with an agreement that, they give me $1 million worth their stock in an IPO and pay me a little bit of cash so I can keep the lights on. And so that's how I'm going to get to $4 million. But if I'm right, we will grow the economies of Latin America and poor countries by billions and billions of dollars. And that's what keeps me going through the hard times. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I'm a weird
So
kid, dude.
it's all right. So going forward from here, what have you learned from the conversations that you mentioned having with entrepreneurs? Like, what have you learned truly makes money?
I've in nursing, you learn a lot about what kills people. Like, how do you grow to be 100 years old? Well, don't die, right? Well, what kills people? If we can fix what generally kills people, guess what? They live longer. If you have an allergic reaction, your throat is closing up. If you can give that person a shot of adrenaline, that person's going to live. If you don't, there's a good chance that person might die. So we learned a lot about what keeps people alive. With companies, companies sell things to people who want to buy their thing. Like, ultimately, that's the job of a business. Figure something out, sell a product, and it costs, your customers give you more money than what it cost you to build that product. It cost me $1, it cost me $100 to make an app. If I can sell that app for $10 and I can sell 20 of them, oh my God, I have a business. So what helps companies succeed? Build things that people want to buy at low cost. Like, ultimately, the math is $1 into your company has to turn into more than $1 at some point. Like, I'm not a math guy. I'm a finance guy, but I like to explain things very clearly. I need to turn $1 into like $1.50 for my business to be worth anything. There's going to be a lot of times when I'm going to lose money, but over the life of my company, I need to be able to grow my sales. I could talk a lot about what kills companies. I've done a lot of work on that. A lot of my work has been, let's not let companies die. I think that might have been a mistake. But what turns a company into a billion-dollar company? They have to grow. In 10 years, they need to grow 15%, 15 to 25% every month. Starting from zero, your sales need to grow 15% a month for 10 years for you to get to a couple $100 million in revenue, and that will make your company worth a couple $1 billion. So I have to turn $1 into $1.15 every month and then reinvest that very aggressively for 10 years, 120 months. That's really hard. But 2 to 3% of companies can actually get that. 2 to 3% of Silicon Valley type venture funded companies. I think a lot of companies, like a car wash, I don't think is ever going to get to, that level of growth. It's just, you can't. Car wash cost land. And so that's why selling software is such a huge deal. And that's why Silicon Valley's got so insanely rich, is what people do is they sell software and they sell it software very aggressively. And turning $1 to $1.15 every month is actually doable. And it's done a lot.
So my follow-up question to this is, who is the wealthiest? You don't have to say a name, but
Yeah.
I mean, you can if you want, if they're public, but who is the richest person that you've ever met, and was there any lesson that you learned there? Because you've talked to countless entrepreneurs, and after running the podcast, one thing I've learned is you never know who's going to make it. Like, I've met people that have gone from like I've emailed them at like just the peak of 100,000 followers, and within like 2 months they have like 400, 500,000 followers. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and then, they don't really grow much after that. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But the point is, you don't know who's going to make it. So after talking to all these different people,
Yep.
was there anybody that really made it into extreme success? Was there anybody that you met that you really were surprised to meet? Who was the richest but starting off though, who was the richest person though?
I would say how much they're worth. I know it's hard to know like who the richest person is. My guess is some of my friends who got into crypto really early are easily worth billions. Um, I got a friend who recently sold his company for $2.5 billion and he owned a quarter of it. I probably know 10 to 15 billionaires. I've spent quite a bit of time in the Middle East. I'm sure I've met people there who are worth tens of billions of dollars, but you never know because they don't publish numbers. You know, if you talk to a son of the sheik who runs a country, sheiks own countries. And so there's
That's
people in the Middle
invaluable.
East. Yeah. I
That's
mean,
beyond money. Yeah.
I own Saudi Arabia. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia basically owns all the money that Saudi Arabia generates in like taxes and in oil royalties and all of that. They have trillions of dollars in like their sovereign wealth fund, which is basically the royal prince's, you know, personal pocketbook. I don't know him. I do have a friend who worked with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia.
So when we're talking about billionaires, a common question comes up, which is how would you know who the richest man in the world is? Because not all net worth is public, right? So there's many ways to calculate net worth. The general is just assets minus liabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So we live in a world where you don't have to show your bank account, right,
Yep.
everywhere you go.
Yep.
So as a result of that, there's people that are out there that are potentially worth trillions that we would never know, and there's other people that just have things like you said that like access that is worth more than money.
Yep.
So when you're talking about the billionaires that you've known, are they, again, you don't have to say names, but are any of them like are going to be found on the Forbes list or no?
Oh yeah. I know I haven't looked at the Forbes list recently, but I suspect I would know like 4 or 5 people there. Um, like the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, I would argue he's probably the closest to $1 trillion. People say Elon Musk is the richest man in the world. It's the Crown Prince of Saudi, just flat
Well,
out.
we don't know what Elon Musk has either,
Yeah,
though, privately. So he could
exactly.
be worth 10 times more.
Well, the thing about Elon Musk is he owns most of his money he made in Tesla stock and in SpaceX stock. We don't know what SpaceX is worth because that company's private. But Tesla, we know how much he owns of Tesla and we know Tesla's share price. So we have a decent idea that he's of what he's worth. So when companies are public and listed on stock exchanges, you get to learn who owns that stock and how much of that stock do they own and what that stock is worth. So it's a lot easier. In like emerging markets where people buy real estate, like, yeah, I could guess at what properties you own. I was just down in Mexico City. The city has like 25 million people. It's massive. And I was sitting there, I'm like, dude, who owns all of this real estate? Like, that's crazy. There are families down there that I'm sure own billions of dollars worth of real estate, and no one will ever know. And they don't want people to know. So, yeah, I have no idea when it comes to that. Because, like, if I'm a insanely wealthy person in Mexico, do I really want word getting out? I don't want anybody to know that I'm insanely wealthy. If I'm in Nigeria, do I really want that information to get out? No. I'd have to have armed security guards up the wazoo around me all the time.
So
So
going from there, what's the lesson that you've learned from knowing some of these people?
I do not know who is going to become a billionaire. Zero idea. I know people that I think definitely won't. But like I met people early on at the Hackers and Founders meetup who said, dude, you're a nurse. Like, what the hell are you doing trying to become a software entrepreneur? Like, I'm currently advising the White House on how to grow Central America's economy. Like, I spend 2 to 3 hours a week doing that. And I've heard people say, dude, I would have never have guessed that you would get to like that level. And so like venture capitalists say they know, but I think a lot of it is just luck, and they make over 100 investments so that 2 to 3 of them become the Facebooks, the Ubers, the SpaceXs of the world.
Well, so going from there now, after knowing billionaires and after knowing thousands of entrepreneurs and, getting to work with people, money inside and out, what do you think you would give as advice to young people?
Advice to young people. I hate to sound like a tech bro, man, but like learn how to code. Like really, when you code, I think things, I type them out, I get the computer to do it. And if someone buys that thing that I made, I can copy and paste that millions and millions of times. Like there is nothing else in the world like that. Like oil companies make that stupid amount of money. High finance companies, private equity funds, they can do almost that well. But if you want to get to become a billionaire, your chances of doing that as a tech entrepreneur are really good. The second thing, if you don't want to do that, private equity fund managing. And so you get a master's degree from a top tier university, get whatever internships you can get and fund companies, because there's a lot of billionaire private equity fund managers. That's not really a game I'm interested in. I ran a fund for years. It sucked. That and dude, ask people what sucks. Like, what's your biggest problem, George, growing your podcast? Like, what's your biggest pain in the ass monetizing your podcast? Like, I'm happy to help you and we can have this conversation after the podcast is done. And if I can make a handful of introductions for you and one of those end up turning out really, really well, or if in 3 years you reach out to me and say, hey, dude, do you know this person on LinkedIn? I'm like, yeah, I have close to 30,000 LinkedIn followers. I have a stupid large network. I'm more than happy to connect you. Like, I'm happy to help. What hurts? How can I help? Those two questions I learned being a nurse, and they have been insanely helpful in business and in life. Like how I ended up becoming advisor to the SEC was I ended up meeting an SEC commissioner. We submitted a bunch of comments to the SEC on how the rules needed to change so that small businesses should raise more money. We got a couple of friends, we did that. We were quoted a bunch of times in the regulations. I ended up meeting one of the SEC commissioners at an event, and I'm like, what's your biggest pain in the butt? How can I help? He's like, you're asking an SEC commissioner how you can help? I'm like, yeah, how can I help? She's like, who are you? I'm a dude. I was a nurse. I'm a software engineer and entrepreneur. I have this huge meetup. I know thousands and thousands of small businesses, on tech entrepreneurs who are trying to, be successful. I want to help them raise money. She took my card, and 9 months later, I was nominated, one of 14 people nominated to advise the SEC on small business capital formation, because she wanted someone who kind of thought out of the box, and that was definitely me. And so, like, how can I help? And paying it forward like that is over the long term is insanely helpful. In the short term, you're not going to make much money. Like at some point, I'm going to have enough money to be able to buy an island in the Caribbean. Like I have zero doubt that that's going to happen. One of these paper ideas is going to end up converting and it'll be worth, tens of millions of dollars, and islands cost $4 million. Like that's, at some point I will buy an island, or I will have the money to buy an island. And how I've gotten here is generally what sucks in running your business and how can I help?
All right. I think that's a pretty good place to end off.
Cool.
That question. And you know what? I'm going to follow that up with one more thing, which is,
Yep.
do you have any final words to the audience?
A lot of entrepreneurs build things that they imagine that people will buy. So they're building a company for an imaginary customer. Imaginary customers are the number one cause of companies dying. I still do it. I've been helping thousands of entrepreneurs around the globe. I still make products for imaginary customers, and it sucks. But I at least know that I need to go out and talk to the entrepreneurs or talk to people who might buy my thing and say, would you buy this product if I built it? Yeah. Okay, give me 3 months. Let me build a product. So stay away from imaginary customers.
One more thing before we end it off. Do you have any networking advice for people?
Yeah, honestly, dude, it's the same pretty much every conversation I have. Like the hackers and founders culture, like our organizers, when they want to organize, like the head of the Caracas, Venezuela hackers and founders community has like 4,000 tech entrepreneurs that attend his events or attended his events on and off. Like the business culture, the culture that we export is, dude, how can I help? Like when people come to our event, like a lot of times we'll have name tags that just say, I'm looking for, or how can I help? And, what's helpful? That is insane, because 5 years down the line, if you end up helping someone, 5 years down the line, that person's insanely helpful. Or, you help someone, 5 years down the line, they sell a company for $100 million. You can say, hey, Janet, how are you? I'm like, oh my gosh, Jonathan, you helped me so much back then. How are you doing? What's going on? I'm like, hey, I have, I'm raising money for this startup idea. Are you interested in investing? Yeah, sure. And when you never know who's going to hit it, it makes sense to be nice and helpful and friendly. And if you do that, like a lot of people, we have this huge problem of like asshole business owners and asshole CEOs. Like it is a very bad idea to be an asshole if you're an entrepreneur, because people will not want to help you. If you are nice and if you are helpful, people tend to like to help back. So if you're networking, be helpful. That's what's gotten me here. I used to wipe ass for a living 15 years ago.
All right. Now we're finally going to end off, all right?
Deal.
In 3, 2, 1.